Good evening and welcome to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the empowerment and education for substance use disorder. We are in a nationwide epidemic with Nassau and Suffolk County really being the epicenter, and we lose far too many people, including my son 5 years ago. So instead of focusing on the end result of the epidemic, how can we start to make a shift in our environment and our communities to change the world for an upcoming generation? Because if we don't change the world, we're not going to have a new generation. It is that serious. So my good friend Kym Laube is back. And you know what? I love to give solutions.
I know. I was your best friend in the last episode. So I've been apparently downgraded to your good friend. So
still my bestest friend.
All right.
And my evil twin.
And your evil twin.
And all of those things. And my partner in crime.
Yes.
It's all about solutions now. We can really, if we wait until anyone is so desperate and so entrenched in a disease, and it is a fatal, progressive disease, and people need to own that statement. Yep. Substance use disorder is a fatal, progressive disease, and left untreated will lead you to certainly death, imprisonment, or you're going to get clean. Those are your three options. I would take recovery, and I would take jail.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose your child. That's prison for me, a prison that I never get out of. So how do we engage and light people up to make solutions now? And it's small, meaningful changes. And if everybody starts to take small, meaningful changes, they will lead you to make bigger changes because you're going to see results. Yeah. You know, it's just those goal settings. So I know last week we talked about the coalition, and that may be very daunting to some people watching right now. Well, I don't want to start a coalition, but, well, you know, you can show up at your Board of Ed meetings and demand a plan of action within your community. Yeah. What else can we do?
Sure. Yeah, I want to just backtrack for a second. I have the privilege of working side by side with you in so many different areas. We've done assemblies together, we've done workshops together, we've done parent sessions where 3 people have showed up, we've been in front of audiences where there were hundreds of people. We've spoken from Shelter Island to Montauk to Lake Placid. Yeah. We've toured the state. We get around. When you just talked about being in the prison yourself, that hit me. And we spent a lot of time together. And it moved me, and it is one of the many reasons I continue to do this work. I do it passionately, I do it willingly, and I do it consciously. And I am so fortunate in that the people in my life and in my circles do it the same way. We are people who are committed to embracing what is, realizing what has happened, and how can we now go and what would be the even better if, right? What would be the different ways that we can make little ripple changes and we can make big friggin' splashes, right? Yeah.
We're kind of the big freaking splashes.
you kind of splash, and then I have to clean up some of that splash. So what we see happening as strategies, right? So across the country, not just limited to Suffolk County, but across the country, communities, feel like they got their knees knocked out from underneath them. They're trying to figure out how we got here. For a lot of us who've been doing this work, we know why, how we wound up here. Whatever some people want to blame, some politics on this, certainly the pharmaceutical companies, and the truth is, all the above.
Yeah.
But what I want people to really make sure of is that the soil was ripe.
Yeah.
you know, one of the things the opiates did was it was just like the match that went right into the bottle of gasoline.
Absolutely.
But the gasoline was still there,
Yeah.
you know, and we were already feeling the effects of substance use disorder. We were already seeing the loss of life and the families destroyed, and whether it was through DWIs, whatever the story was, we already saw it happening. The opiates fast forwarded us and got different people to pay attention. And by golly, I hope that now that many of us are paying attention, we can start to do stuff. You know, we'll show up to a school to do a parent presentation, and unfortunately, sometimes only 10 parents show up.
Yeah.
Right? We've had less than that show up.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, is then suddenly when it blows up in a school, people will be like, why haven't anybody been talking about it? Why isn't anybody saying anything?
Yeah.
And we're like, we were in March, we were in April, we were in May. And we've been doing a lot of training, and we've been doing a lot of talking. And I know you often say, enough of the talking, now let's get to action.
Yes.
And action is such an important place to get to, right? So when we begin to talk about community change, I want folks to know that, you know, one person can start a huge movement and a huge motion. And when they begin,
Yes, they can.
They can, right? And when they begin to bring some others around them, boy, that has so much more impact. So there are, again, things that we watch communities do very smartly. We see some communities in Suffolk County and Nassau County having some great success and great change, and it meant, you know, doing things time and time again. So one of the first things you always want to do is get clear, accurate information out to schools and communities and parents and people in general. And sometimes we have to kind of check our own facts, and we have to check that information that we're giving. Just because we read it on the internet doesn't make sure that doesn't ensure that it is 100% true. So we want
That's an understatement.
That's an understatement, right? So we want to make sure that we're looking at good, accurate information, and we're delivering that information, whether it's to our kids, to our schools, to our communities, wherever that information is being delivered. It's being delivered by folks who know what they're talking about. What's been a huge change over the years is you know, peers getting involved in our work, getting lived experience, and that certainly has its place, and it certainly has its impacts and its way that it's made. But what I love about you in particular is when you go in, you just don't tell your life story. That's a piece of what you do, but you've done your homework. You've begun to learn how this affects the family. You've begun to learn how it affects the community, how it affects the school. We cannot just talk from a one-dimensional point of view. We always have to take a look at what our knowledge of information is and what our prevention knowledge is. So clear, accurate information. And some communities have really done we just finished up Red Ribbon Week. I know I was in a school every day talking, every day. And so were the rest of my prevention
folks. It should be a red ribbon year.
Yeah, we actually, for our coalition out in Sag Harbor, it's called Safe in Sag Harbor, we handed out bags that had red ribbons on it, but they said celebrating Red Ribbon Week all year long. Yeah. Because this is not about, we just talk about it here.
It's not the checklist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not, okay, had the assembly for drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And that's done.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, bringing in a recovery speaker and then speaking to young people, speaking to the students, you know, they lived through it. Yeah. They had some pretty crazy times. That's what they're going to take away. Yeah. So you hear it as an adult and say, oh my God, that'll scare. It doesn't scare them. Yeah. It gives credence to, I can do that, and I'd probably be okay. Yeah. At some point. And we don't want to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing that young people tell me very candidly, I'll never be that stupid to do what they did. I know when I got this under control, which is one of the biggest lies we can tell ourselves, right? So it really, correct. Recovery speakers have a value. I
Absolutely.
Certainly, I want to include that. But again, we always want to match that with making sure we have some prevention, some other preventions added in or incorporated in. And, if a school, sometimes schools will spend thousands of dollars for speakers to come in. I know one speaker in particular, the school pays him $7,000 to come in and tell their story. I would argue that for $7,000, you can contract with any prevention agency in Suffolk County, offer them $7,000. They're going to give you an educator who could go in and teach long-term evidence-based programming in your school on an ongoing basis.
Yes.
So now it's not just learning about 1 hour of information. Now
Correct.
it's about learning 8 different life lessons.
And I'll say that's Chris Herron, and he has a very compelling story, Chris Herron, the basketball player.
Sure.
You can also get the movie that was done by ESPN and save $7,000, get the educator in, and show that movie on a separate time.
Yeah.
It's still a very powerful movie.
Yeah, and that's right. So what we want to push schools
But
to
it's
do,
not going to be a community shift.
yeah, and right, and we want to invest in good prevention, and so technically, we know that one-shot deals don't work, right? You never
No.
want to just do a one-shot deal. Now, I will say, there are some great presenters out there. We just had one out in Sag Harbor, and I know I think he was in Patcho. He's in a bunch of schools. He's a comedian. He's a psychologist. He's a motivational speaker. He happens to be an alumni of Teen Institute in New Jersey, which is one of our sister programs in New Jersey. His name is Dr. Matt Bellis. What we loved about his presentation and why we got behind bringing in, one is, first of all, that school has so many other strategies built in. So
Okay.
it's not a one and done deal, right? But what we loved about Matt was, first of all, he made the kids laugh. The kids connected to him. But he also he used science as part of his conversation and gave them concrete skills on how to deal with some of life's challenges when they come up, from something as mindful breathing and learning to just quiet your mind and do meditate, all those different things.
The young lady that was here last week, Abby, who talked about mindfulness of peeling an orange and how that could take you away for 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. When we really stop, the Hugs kids I work with, I always use the term, take a deep breath, wiggle your toes, and be where your feet are at. Because it gets them just for the moment to get centered and grounded.
Yes.
But it's so funny. One of the things one of my secret pleasures is when I get a kid who's graduated and will send me a private message that's like, you know what, I was on the beach today, I wiggled my toes, and for the first time in my adult life, I was where my feet were at. I just love knowing that there's something we
planted a
can
seed.
teach, right, that
Yes.
has that ongoing stuff. So there are some really powerful, great speakers out there. What I encourage anybody who's investing in them is make sure that they've got some stuff behind their name. Any one of us can learn how to be inspirational
Yes.
and motivational, right? But you want to give some tangible tools for young people to walk away with.
Well, in Nassau and Suffolk County, we do have communities of solution, and we can get that. I'll get that information on the website for people. But there are so many speakers that have not been vetted, that are not going to give you the message or the follow-up that needs to be done.
Yeah.
So it's a very poor messaging. So you really do need to check with some professionals as to, is this going to help or is this going to hurt?
Yeah.
Because what you seemingly may think is going to help may not be the best for your community. So we do need to vet programs.
You've always heard me talk about bringing key stakeholders together,
Yes.
right? And I always say this with teachers. When we talk about speakers and folks who are going to come in, I talk with teachers, and sometimes they'll say, oh, the kids were so into him. The kids were glued to every word that speaker said. I'm a pretty dynamic speaker. I can get the kids glued in
Yes.
to me too. But if I'm not giving them tangible things, a moment of them being connected to a sad story is not, again, going to, what am I giving them to, what's the legacy I'm going to leave them with on that?
Correct.
And I really want to make sure that our work and the work of my peers is stuff that is going to leave a legacy of some, of some standing.
And it's not going to resonate with every kid in that room
Absolutely.
that particular day, which is why it has to be a continuing conversation.
Right. Here's what, I was in a school the other day. I did an assembly for 7th graders, and I got a standing ovation. Not a bad day at the office when I finished up my shift of speaking to kids, and I got a standing ovation, right? So I felt good in the moment. It was a good, my brain was firing.
Oh, yeah.
This is good stuff, right? So So one of the things that we talked about in there, and one of the reasons that I feel the kids connected to me, was I was talking about real deal stuff, about walking through emotions, walking through feelings, and beginning to identify that. I don't know that we put kids in a place long enough to acknowledge the social and emotional health needs that they have. And so when speakers come in, we want to make sure that they're giving them some skills on how to do just exactly that, right? But if I'm going in just to tell my story because, and look, I have a great life story. It's pretty compelling, right? If I'm just going in to tell that, that's about my needs to tell my story.
Right. But there needs to be solutions.
Right. And
there needs to be solutions.
What are the takeaway tools, right?
Yes.
So we know speakers, we know there's some great dynamic speakers, we want to keep using them, but we also want to make sure that we're investing our dollar well. We know that for every dollar we spend in prevention, we save $10 to $22 on the treatment end. Every dollar we save in prevention, 10 to 22. We also know that prevention is sorely underfunded, completely underfunded, and we're making some strides in that. But we're really underfunded. So when we have this limited amount of dollars, we want to spend them as smart and as wise as we possibly can. So bring in a speaker during Red Ribbon Week. Have at it. Red Ribbon Week can be a great jump start to your conversation that will last you year long. On top of Red Ribbon Week, teaching different things, and you touch mindfulness, yoga, breathing, teaching kids about defense mechanisms, and so they can understand why they use them when they come up. Teaching them about their emotional response, how to keep the intellectual over the emotional, and for some kids, how to tap into the emotional and turn down the the intellectual. So there are
they need to know. All kids today need to know that they are okay if things are not solved in a blink of a second, because they can find out the answer to a question in a few seconds. Their dinner can be made in under a minute if they need to. They are an immediate gratification generation, and they need to be able to sit in a little bit of uncomfortableness and know that that's normal too.
We've pushed kids, and this is one of those kind of paradoxes we live in. We continue to tell kids to live outside their comfort zone. The magic happens outside. Be outside your comfort zone. But the second our kids feel uncomfortable, we swoop in to fix it for them, right? And that, again, is one of those areas that I think we have to look at as adults, that we've been part of this creation, right? That sometimes the real world is going to tell them no. They're not going to get the job. They're not going to get the girl. They're not going to have that one thing that they really want, and they're going to have to know how to deal with that adversity.
Absolutely.
And better to learn how to deal with that.
The lesson comes in failure. The lesson never comes in victory.
And for so many of our Suffolk County communities, our kids are big fish in little bubbles, in little ponds. I mean, they really are. Not for all. I mean, you've got your big schools. Let's give, Sachem, that's a big ocean. And so what happens is they get out there in the real world, and suddenly they're these little fish, and then they're left with that question, who am I? Who am I when I don't have my posse around? Who am I when I don't have my community around? And so that first year of college, really
challenging.
A challenging thing. So
it can be. It doesn't always have to be.
Doesn't have to be. You got it, right?
Because
we can give, because part of the growth is growing through that uncomfortability. So when we look at schools using Red Ribbon Week, look at them spending time at least talking about it. And I feel for schools because I've sat with enough administrators who've told me the double-edged sword. They said, look, Kym, we can have 10 parents in here screaming, you got to do more drug and alcohol education. I know the kids are vaping. I know the kids are smoking pot. We got to do more. And you'll have 10 parents that come in and say, my kid's only in 3rd grade. Don't you dare tell them about drugs and alcohol. And so school administrators are left in a position of how much to teach, when to teach, what's their role in it, how can they be influencers, and then there's the whole property value thing. Well, if you start talking about bringing in a school resource officer, if you start talking about bringing in a drug and alcohol counselor, then our school is going to get seen as having a drug problem. Here's the news flash. If your school's in Suffolk County, you have a drug and alcohol problem. If your school's in Nassau County, you probably have one there too.
If your school is in Saranac Lake, you have a drug and alcohol
Right?
problem.
It's just what's going on today
In the world.
right? It's just what's going on. So let's do better, right? Let's just continue to do better. So you want a little motivational, a little inspirational, a little thought-based, skill-building
But that
presenters are
third
not
grader
bad.
too, you know, when we're talking about evidence-based curriculum in school, drugs and alcohol aren't mentioned in the kindergarten, first, second, third grade.
Yeah, they're not.
It's coping skills, it's all of those things. But here's the reality of life. My 3-year-old grandson today I have Thomas's stuffed animal from when he was little in my room, and we were talking about Uncle Tom and everything else. And he said, how come he's in heaven? And my daughter just didn't even know. And so CJ and I had a conversation that was appropriate for a 3-year-old to have. Because I'm going to have to swim in those waters for the rest of, we have a genetic disposition in our family now.
Yeah.
So that 3-year-old, and my daughter had a baby at 19, and we have a Vincent who is 10 years old. He's very capable. Not that he's very capable and he shouldn't be capable, but he needs bigger answers to his questions now so that he has an understanding of where he falls. Because guess what? 11 years old is right?
Yeah, so for males that have already, so in our study of young people in Suffolk County, of the males who have identified themselves of drinking, they identified that 11 was the average age that was when
the
their
first time
drank.
they took a
Yeah.
first drink.
Yeah, so we know for young females it's 13.
Yeah.
So,
Which they're babies.
they are such babies.
But how I speak to my 3-year-old today is certainly going to open that. The conversation's open now. He can come to me and ask me anything he wants, and we celebrate Thomas's life. But they also need to know about the path that Thomas took unknowingly.
And there's a whole, there are great resources out there, how to talk to kids. I want to say one of my most proud moments of New York State Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services, New York State OASIS, was when they delivered a couple of bits of resources, and they're on their website. I encourage people.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So one of the first ones that I want to let schools, everybody know about, it's called Talk to Prevent.
Yes.
Talk, TALK, the number 2, prevent. And all you have to do is Google that. It'll come up and it'll bring you through how do you address this with your kindergartner through 3rd grade. What's appropriate to talk to a 4th through 6th grader about? What do you want to be talking in different strategies you want to use 7th through 10th, and so on. It brings you right through the developmental ages and strategies. So schools can play a really great part of, one, bringing in speakers, right? We certainly want to do that. We want to encourage them to keep bringing in those parent sessions. Whether you have 5 parents in the room, 50 parents in the room, whether it's having parent coming to the PTO and doing those natural places where we push in and give education, whether we have transition nights. I always give props to Debbie Verga over at Comac and her coalition over there. Their transition night is standing room only. We have a following over there. And what their school does, and it could easily be replicated in any school, is when the kids are moving from one building to the next.
At any point in time, elementary to middle school.
Middle school to high school, right? They have 2 separate nights. When kids are moving to that next big building, parents feel a little bit vulnerable. They don't know what's going to happen over there. They don't know who the players are going to be, especially if you have feeder schools like we certainly do on these. You don't know the parents from the other school district, right? So transition nights are an opportunity, and that's where we see parents come out in droves. We pack the house. And what Debbie will do is they'll have a main speaker come in, and then people break out into different workshops. And the workshop I run is how to raise your teen or tween without the use of duct tape or tasers, right? And how do you get through those years? And how do you begin to understand what's going on, when they're looking at you crying and they don't know why they're crying, and how do you learn skills of how to have conversation with kids, not asking yes or no questions, 'cause
Open-ended questions.
ask your kid how his day went, you're going to get good, bad, or right? So you want to begin to talk about different questions and ways you can ask to get your kids to engage in dialogue.
And don't answer for them and don't assume.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for parents, we talk about how, right, our children's day goes.
Yeah.
Parents are so overwhelmed with life. And then you come home and you have a family to take care of. In your mind, again, when we think with our adult mind, a 10-year-old's problem isn't a problem, and you're going to tell them that's nothing. To them, that's everything.
Right.
And how you respond to them is how they're going to meet back with the world.
Yeah. There was I want to get back to the schools, but I also want to tell you, the Sachem community had a real big loss this year, and one of the moms, I've been invited into some of the moms' pages, and I get to share on their Facebook stuff, and one of the things that one particular mom said was, "I wish our kids saw themselves that we see them."
Yes.
And I paused, because I don't know that parents see themselves the way that kids see them either. And wouldn't it be great if all of us saw each other the way other people saw us? Because I think what happens...
Or see yourself the way your dog thinks you are.
Right? That's why I got
pretty
four
awesome.
dogs. I got four dogs, right? Pit bulls to Pomeranians, it explains a lot about me, right? But one of the things that I truly believe is human beings walking around, the dialogue of the I'm not enough often outweighs the dialogue of what I am.
Yeah.
And whether I'm working with a group of moms, whether I'm working with a group of high school kids, we all need a moment to take and really look at what our positive inventory is instead of what our negative inventory is.
The negative is always seemingly easier to believe.
Oh, gosh. We again, we've taught our kids they can do everything they want to do. And what I kind of feel that sometimes we missed is we built them up on ego, and we missed the opportunity for the conversation about self-esteem.
Yeah.
And so kids will look from the outside in, but very much the same way. Look, I'm not going to lie. I put a good picture of myself up on Facebook and people give me positive stuff. My brain fires and says, ooh, that feels good. They're saying good stuff, right? So that's part of our human nature.
And if they say something bad, you delete it.
I just take it down. No. I just tell people I do that. So that stuff is feel-good stuff. And because we have so many different ways that we're not firing the serotonins and all the stuff that feels good because we're under fatigue so much of the time.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways that is a little bit more unique to Suffolk County because of the price you pay to live here.
Yeah.
There is a price you pay to live here. We work at a crazy pace.
Yes.
We love where we live, and we're working like dogs to keep living here.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's about choice. And so finding that balance about if I'm going to choose this and I have to show up this way, that's okay. And balancing out with good ways to take care of ourselves and being a little gentler. If you walk into my office right now, there's a star on my desk that says, be gentle with yourself and others.
Yes.
And as a daily reminder, so that when I start being a bear, to settle down. So going back, and I think we got,
got a little sidetrack.
A little sidetrack.
But I think that's an important sidetrack to take, because when you are frenetic, so crazy at work, to take a moment and peel an orange.
Right. And if we don't have it, how do we give it away?
Yes.
And there's a very specific reason when you're on the airplane, it says, put the mask on you first, right? And so we really, even as adults, as moms, as dads, as aunts, as uncles, learning how to find that stuff for ourselves, and then we can pass it on, because it needs to be passed on.
It needs to be passed on, and there's a sign, and as a mom, you'll appreciate it. If the mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. So you know what? Be the example, because your kids are watching you all the time. So if you are physically active and fit, the chances are the rest of your family is going to follow that suit. If you come home and drink wine and say, I had a bad day, leave me alone,
Yeah.
it's not going to be it's not a stretch for your 9-year-old to come home and say, I had a bad day today.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're going to mimic you because you're still their
Absolutely.
greatest hero.
You're their number one teacher. And I
Yes.
think sometimes parents, we give up our power to our kids, right? But our kids say, well, we don't want you going. I've had parents email me and say, I wanted to come and listen to your talk, but my kid didn't want me to go there. And that's where I want to make a shift of empowering parents to be parents. Parenting is an action verb. And there are going to be things we have to do as a parent that are uncomfortable.
And it's none of their business where you're going if you want to go to a talk.
Yeah. Changing their diaper was uncomfortable too, but we had to suck it up and do it because it needed to get done, right? So there is part of that comes into this conversation. So when your school offers a drug and alcohol night, that's an awesome opportunity to go out. When they do a transition night, like they do over in Comac, go out, learn. Because I don't know everything about parenting. I have no idea.
They didn't come with the book.
They didn't come with the book.
If they came with the book and we had read it prior to, we may not have any.
Yeah,
let's put it that way.
I have heard that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other part is when a school begins to enact policies. Policies is what changes this, right? And so the other day, just yesterday, I did a presentation for Suffolk Zone for health teachers, coaches, phys ed teachers. It's a great conference they had, and we do a whole piece on addiction and the athlete. Now, I want to say, one of the things I've learned so incredibly from you, so painfully from you, was that when your son Andrew came home and found his brother unconscious and dead in the living room, his first call was to you. His second call was to his wrestling coach. That resonated in me when I heard that. And then I started to think about, are coaches equipped?
They're not.
They're not. And it's no fault of their own because they're trained to teach the sport to get the win,
But they're also, in Kings Park, in my hometown, I am going to be doing some work in the school.
Awesome.
Because the school has opted after, so in my community, we've spoken there and had the 10 people, the 15 people. Well, now we're up to a few hundred people. It has taken a few years for that to occur, but it's occurring.
Yeah.
And the assistant principal went back and said, we're going to do more. And they're doing mindfulness for the next 60 days. And part of that is going to be, he's like, you have a compelling story for what happened in their own community. So let's talk to them about it. And I said, I'll be happy to come up. I want Coach Magnani to speak too, because they may not have me to talk to, but they need to know that within their four walls when they're at school, they may not have people at home that they can depend on and trust. So how awesome is it to trust your coach? Now, my Andrew wrestled forever. And Andrew had some, he did some things. And when he did some things, I said, go get in the car. He goes, where are we going? I go, we're going to go see your coach because you're going to tell him your behavior and we're going to see if you still get to stay on the team because that's your consequence. Your choice, your consequence. Don't bring me there. That was fear that I couldn't put inside of him, was it? Because that was a consequence he didn't want to have to handle. Shifted his behavior quite suddenly.
There was one community that I know of that during season, if coaches found out there was a party, they would go and look to see if any of their football players were there. And they yanked them out and they benched them for the game on Saturday.
That has to happen once. I keep saying that. That has to happen once. Because your star player sitting on the bench, nobody else is going to even attempt it.
And because, so here's that part of it. Because we're so pushed for the scholarship here on Long Island, because we so push for the sport, the parents of the community got to get behind the coach who does that. And I give a coach
Absolutely.
who does that and an administration who does that tremendous amount of pressure and courage, because the pressure
Yes.
that they're under is to not do that, because oftentimes it's a popular kid with, family's been donating to the booster
Yes.
club for years, right?
Yes.
But at some point we got to pull out all of the different tools that we have. So
Such an effective tool right there.
right, yeah. So talking to coaches and teaching coaches about the value of this and teaching
And
about
recognizing it.
and how it keeps their kids healthier on the playing field. One night of drinking negates 2 weeks peak performance training time. So one night of drinking takes away 2 weeks peak performance training time. Let's do the math on this. Whole team goes out and drinks and gets drunk on a Saturday night. Well, as long as they don't drink for 2 weeks and they all go at their discipline and work and work and work and work and work, 2 weeks later, they'll be back at the performance they were back here. So their bodies don't heal. One night of drinking, they're twice as likely to sustain an injury the next day. So this affects their team. And how many coaches wind up dealing with stuff that those knucklehead kids, what did they do? Because they were kids being kids, right?
Yes.
So one of the things we have to do is stop allowing that to be the rite of passage.
Yes.
It's just kids being kids, because kids are dying. So when we start to say, let's educate families, let's do as much as we can
Yes.
to empower and educate families.
Yes.
Family nights, whether it's at your church, there's evidence-based. There are 5-week parenting programs that any of your prevention providers can facilitate to get parent groups, and to really encourage parents that this is really about making your kid more
Wow.
successful,
Yes.
healthier, so that they can do better on the SATs, ACTs. Somebody asked me once,
Correct.
they were like, how do you think we should get the parents to come to a parent session? And I said, well, there are 2 ways you can do it. First of all, you can serve wine and cheese. And if you serve wine and cheese, you'll have a ton of parents in
Yes.
the room. And I don't mean
very-
to knock my parent friends, but I know what they show up for. The second thing is, I've always said, I want to call it like a night to teach you how to get the most money you can get for your kid to go to college. And they would pack the room, and then
Pack
you'd
the
say,
room.
keep them sober, right?
Yeah.
Then you just say, let's talk about brain health. Let's talk about ways. Because kids who are under the influence or struggling or hungover, or kids who are starting in the throes, do not score well. Dr. Jeff Reynolds says that all the time. They do not score well on standardized
You know what I tell
tests.
them? By the time they're in high school and you're really in the throes of addiction, to the extent that, say, my son was,
Yeah.
if your child's dead, they don't test well either.
Yeah.
But that's what we're talking about. If allowed, the progression of the disease in an adolescent's brain, it's like a fire.
Yeah.
So there's a girl at Outreach, and she's part of the little package. Within 6 months of smoking pot, 6 months later, she was injecting heroin at the age of 13. At the age of 13, that was the progression of her disease.
So quick.
That's her telling the story.
Yeah.
She had no education on what was happening. She just followed. She needed it.
Yeah.
She needed it. She wanted it. She did it. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And
So
how-
we're not talking about a span
No.
of 10 years or 5 years. We're talking about a span of 6 months.
Yeah. And that's right. So those are some of the hard things, is for people to understand that it can take off that quick.
Yes.
And thank goodness she was able to find recovery. But that's not the story for everybody. And certainly,
Absolutely not.
as you know that.
Right.
Right. So if we begin to educate parents more, some schools will use the strategy of mandating them for the prom, to get the prom ticket. And if you're out there on Long Island and you mandate, you probably heard me speak or you speak or one of those things, right? My concern is prom is way too long. By the time
Way too long. By the
we
time
wait
they're
till-
18, they don't want to
They
hear
know
it.
exactly
They
where
know-
everything's
exactly.
stashed. It's all set, right? So we want to use meaningful opportunities with parents. There's nothing wrong when all the parents are sitting there in the audience waiting for the concert. Run some facts up against a screen.
Yep.
Did you know type stuff. That's a great way. You've got parents sitting there having awkward conversation anyway. why not have, or do a quick game show? We were,
Rocky Point also did the game show is great. And it's very animated and
Yep.
engaging, and it's fun.
Yeah.
But Rocky Point also, to get into the
Power School.
to get into check your kids' grades and homeworks and everything else, you have to watch a PSA.
Yeah, yeah. And so and this is where I implore people to do really good PSAs, do
Yes.
really meaningful stuff that touch on prevention, that touch on
Yes.
strategies you could use right now.
That's so I did some commercials with Walk FM, and I've had parents say, every time that comes on, I take 15 seconds and have a conversation with my kids.
That's right.
Because you can't let those teachable moments go.
Right.
And there's always teachable moments.
Always.
Always teachable moments. Watching the news, reading the paper, in your community, not teach at them, teach with them.
And when we begin to change some of the lens that we look at, I encourage parents.
And the language.
And the language, right? I encourage parents to just go for 1 week and look at all of the messaging in 1 week that they get that alcohol is okay. And here's what'll happen. Parents will be like, yeah. Then they'll come back to me a week later and they'll say, okay, Kym, so I left your workshop. I logged on online. And once I went onto Facebook, this one had a beer in his hand, this one had a drink, this one's cute little toes were sitting up with
Right.
your typical beach scene with somebody in the margarita in their hand. And they were like, okay. And then they started to realize how much joking was going about it.
Yeah.
But then they started to look at the advertising that was popping up. And then they said, you know what, okay. So then the next day I went and I started to really look at where product placement was.
Yeah.
And how much messaging I get. And when you start to think about, again, how infiltrated and saturated into our communities, until we take a step back, we often don't realize it. It's kind of like when you get a new car, suddenly you see that car all over the
Everywhere.
place. When you change the lens that you look, very much
You can sit
will
and
change
watch
what you
TV,
see.
any of the major any of the major channels.
Yeah.
There's prescription drugs. Oh, you feel this way, take this. You feel that way, you take this. If you're constipated from taking opioids, take this.
Take this, right? So the thought behind all this is if we can find other ways to counteract that messaging,
Yes.
and switch it to a positive norming campaign, or whether we're just giving accurate information, the times when the parents are hostage before a concert starts is a great time for schools to do that, right? A lot of schools do some messaging in their daily announcements, and they remind some mindfulness things and some tools and some clear, accurate information in there. But then we want to take it out into the community. We want to say, what can we do in our community? So some coalitions have done things like prescription takebacks, where they have worked hand in hand with law enforcement. There's a lot of unused, unwanted, expired prescription and non-prescription medications.
Non-prescription, even vitamins.
That are out there.
Yeah.
Right? And so I always say we want to protect our natural resources, our youth, and our waterways.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that we use those takebacks. Now, every police precinct in Suffolk County has one.
Yes.
And most of the East End departments do as well. They have right in the
lobby. No questions asked. You walk in,
drop
put your
it in,
bag in, and
done.
you're out.
Done, right? So it's really important that we reduce access by taking care of that. So that's
Have a lockbox in your house too for your prescription drugs.
Absolutely.
The one place where you have privacy is the one place that we keep those prescription drugs.
Yeah.
So, you used to put a safety lock on the cleaning items.
It's age appropriately keeping them safe.
Yes.
Still your job to keep them safe, right? So we've seen some great work done in communities where they've brought speakers in. We just did a filming of Reversing the Stigma, which was the great New York State Oasis movie. More and more we're shifting the conversation.
We're shifting it to recovery, and we need to shift it to a positive outcome.
Yep.
Because that negative outcome, and we need to start to make this huge shift in correcting, I shouldn't say correcting, because it's not a moral failing or anything else. However, we have to change where society is going.
Yeah.
You need to slow it down for your kids.
Yeah.
You know that you need to bulletproof your family. When you're inside your house, you're inside your house. And they need to feel safe. They need to be able to know that they have a partner with mom and dad. And if they don't have a partner, because there are a lot of families that kids don't have an adult that we have those coaches, teachers, lunch lady.
Community parenting.
Right.
Community parenting.
Community parenting. That's the name of the game. Thank you, honey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You know, we're going to put together more on the website, some very strategic ideas for families, for schools, and be the change. Don't sit back. You know, everyone can do one good thing every single day of their lives. Have a great weekend.